The good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that we might be able to avoid World War III or just more wars happening if countries, whether good, whether bad, actually come together and, talk about a ceasefire. And that seems to be happening in the Middle East. Hezbollah and Israel are actually discussing. It seems like there might actually be a ceasefire. So, hey, that's good. We're going to start off right out the gate with that. Then we're going to take a look specifically at Canada stuff. In particular, Mark Miller, the current immigration MP, who's going to have to update his resume very, very soon because he's going to be out of a job, what he has to say when he's attacked by reporters in Parliament. And then we're taking a look at conservative premier Doug Ford, who it looks like he's holding back tears. And I'm not saying that for a headline, for a thumbnail. Actually looks like he's holding back tears. The betrayal of America. It's like being stabbed in the back by your friend or your family. How could they do this? Well, I'll tell you. You don't even have to stick around for the full video. I'm going to tell you why America did this. There's a gray zone within America trade deals, within world trade deals. And only if a country that is doing trade with America is causing actual threat or harm to America, can they actually pull out of trades or add all these tariffs? That's the Coles Notes version, okay? Well, with Canada's open border policy, we're letting people in left, right, and center. Come on in. Hey, you got a terrorist background resume? Come on in. Hey, your resume is absolutely blank. We don't know who you are, but you're in ISIS beheading videos? Come on in. So then we got a lot of people, not good people living here in Canada. And they just walk across into America and want to go and commit crimes. Go figure. That's kind of what terrorists do. But hey, who am I to judge, right? Who am I to judge? Well, Trump sees that as an issue. Absolutely, as he should. That's a massive issue. Hey, there's issues within America that we also should be concerned about, such as drugs, such as illegal immigrants, such as guns coming in illegally from America into Canada. It's a massive issue. But let's focus on Canada, what we're doing wrong with America, okay? So we've got a bunch of bad people living here. They're making their way into America. Well, that's causing harm, terrorist threats, increased security, FBI, CIA, blah, 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 blah. They're all like, hey, whoa, Canada immigration. Yeah, no, that's not cool, man. You can't border us and then have a bunch of bad people living there that want to come here. Under that law, subsection 72A, subsection form 352, I'm just making up numbers. You know what I'm trying to say? In that code of exemptions and being allowed to basically put tariffs onto countries that you have existing trade deals with, that exists. And so you got Ontario Premier Doug Ford who's going, how can this happen? What's going on? Well, that right there, it's not Trump's fault for enacting this emergency code and trying to implement 25% tariffs on a country that's literally letting terrorists into America. So yeah, it's not Trump's fault for writing that law. He didn't write the law. It's existed. It's not his fault for using that law. It's us for allowing our own country to get within that gray area for that law to be invoked. But hey, we're going to get into that later on in this video. Like I said, we're going to start off with the ceasefire stuff. So subscribe to the channel, and let's just jump right into it.
Israel's Security Cabinet is set to vote on a proposal to end the fighting with Hezbollah in Lebanon. CTV's Scott Hurst joins us live with the latest details. What do we know about this proposal so far?
Good morning, Jamie. I can tell you that the Israeli Security Cabinet is meeting to discuss this proposed deal at this hour. And of course, it would be quite a diplomatic feat to end at least one of the conflicts in the Middle East, or in the short term, pause some of the hostilities to allow more diplomacy and potentially reach a more lasting ceasefire with the terrorist group Hezbollah. This is a U.S. and French broker deal, and let's run through some of the specifics of the deal that is currently on the table. The proposal would begin with an initial 2-month ceasefire that some hope could form more of a basis for a lasting ceasefire during which Israeli forces would withdraw from Lebanon and Hezbollah would end its armed presence along the southern border with Israel. That would be accompanied by an influx of thousands of more Lebanese army troops, and they would help patrol the border area along with an existing UN peacekeeping force in the region. Now, Jamie, leading up to this meeting of the Israeli Security Cabinet, the Israeli military has been attacking Hezbollah targets in the Lebanese capital on a large scale. And of course, there's an acknowledgement that as Israel and Hezbollah continue to trade fire, one misstep could upend these talks. But the Israeli Security Cabinet, Jamie, is meeting at this hour to discuss this proposal.
See, this is something that everyone can kind of agree with, is that we don't want war. Like, call for a ceasefire, put Trump in immediately. Why are we still funding any of these wars? Especially here as Canadians, taxpayers, we don't want to fund any of this stuff. I don't care which side you agree with, which side you want to win. There's no winners in war. And then to talk a little bit more in depth, you have the EU chief talking about how there is no excuse for not implementing a ceasefire.
Year, the international community, including our allies, were incapable of bringing a diplomatic solution. Hezbollah will not back down. Hezbollah has tied itself with Hamas, with its objectives, and so we were left with no other option but to go into war in order to push them back, to dismantle as much as possible the capability of Hezbollah, and in order to bring back the safety and the security of our northern border.
There is not an excuse for not implementing a ceasefire. Otherwise, Lebanon will fall apart. So let's put pressure on Israel in order to approve the proposal of ceasefire today. But I heard voices from the extremist ministers of the Israeli government willing to continue the fight.
The country as a whole is paralyzed, and we wanted to finish this and to have a ceasefire. Hopefully by tonight we will have this ceasefire.
There's two main goals. One, that they will not be able to accumulate more arsenal and go back to the military power and the military force that they held before. We are aiming to prevent that, to rebuild their strength. And the other one is to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't go south of the Litani River. The core issue is about enforcement, to make sure that this will not happen. And unfortunately, throughout years, we've been let down by the international community, including forces like UNIFIL, who were meant to prevent Hezbollah's threat on Israel.
As the Israelis withdraw, will fill in their place around 5,000 troops. This would be added to around 5,000 that exist in the south. And in cooperation with UNIFIL, after 60 days, the only authority in South Lebanon, in south of the Litani, not South Lebanon, in south of the Litani, it would be the authority of the Lebanese government. This process would lead to negotiations with Israel on the borders and will settle once and for all the borders between us and Israel. And it has not been settled for a long time. And
yeah, look, the whole point of this is that let them fight their wars. This shouldn't be funded by the West. We are literally dealing with 2 months of tax relief, and then the taxes are back. We got our own shit to worry about, plus 25% tariffs. I'm sorry, but Canada is out of money. We're out. We're closed, and we're out of money. Look, we can get into debates all day long about who should win, what should be the next military strategy. At the end of the day, it's not in Canada. It doesn't involve Canada. Ukraine is not a part of NATO. Israel is not a part of NATO. And so what the hell are we doing? Why are we supporting any of this? It should always be about peace. We live in a time where nuclear war is a real freaking threat. People have nukes. People are ready to use nukes. Everyone is waiting for the first nuke to go. And then everybody is going to be trigger happy and push their buttons. And so in a time where we're dealing with that level of craziness, we shouldn't be pushing for war at all. But that's my own personal opinion, and I would absolutely love to know yours. Next, we're going to take a look at what's actually going on here in Canada with the whole tariff stuff. Let's take a look here at Mark Miller, immigration minister, who gets stopped in Parliament.
The north-south flow of people coming in from Canada into the U.S., just as we've had concern with the U.S. of the flow of people coming from the south to the north. So we have shared interests in here in making it something that is manageable and controlled, and those that are not authorized to cross the border are promptly returned pursuant to the safe third country agreement. So,
are you planning to deploy more officers than you were?
Look, it is a, in comparison to the border with Mexico, it's the equivalent on a yearly basis of a significant weekend at the Mexico border, but it's not something that at the same time I want to not take seriously, because it is serious, and we have a job not to make our problems the Americans' problems, and they have a job not to make their problems ours.
Will you consider new measures? In light of last night's announcement, maybe around the safe third country agreement, or others new measures in light of last night's announcement?
There's a number of measures that we are considering in any event, regardless of what the incoming administration would have been. Clearly, this will be part of a discussion that we'll have with the Americans when we have an opportunity to sit down with them.
Yeah, that doesn't scream confidence. That feels like these people are extremely worried and they're panicked. And one of the people leading the charge on panic is this guy right here, Ontario Premier. Let's take a look at his response to the tariffs.
Well, good morning, everyone. Last night at 6:35, we received the biggest threat we've ever received from our closest friends and ally, from President-elect Trump, that they're threatening to put a 25% tariff on all goods coming across the border into the U.S. and Mexico. What I found unfair about the comments is to compare us to Mexico. And I can tell you, Canada is no Mexico. We do approximately, just Ontario alone, $500 billion of two-way trade. I found his comments unfair. I found him insulting. It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. I spent a lot of time in the U.S., and I have yet to talk to one American that has any issue with Canadians. We see drugs flow from Mexico, coming up through California, in through BC, into Alberta, into Ontario, and what we need to do is take that threat seriously. I had a conversation with the Prime Minister after he spoke to President-elect Trump last night. The threat is serious. We need to do better on our borders. We need to give the resources to CBSA, which are fine people. And I know, talking to other premiers last night, that we will do everything we can as provincial governments and territorial governments to secure our borders. There's over 2.1 million Mexicans and other nationalities coming across the southern border. Compared to Canada, it's over 197 million, which is unacceptable. When it comes to drugs, 1 ounce of any illegal drug is 1 ounce too many going back and forth across the border. 1 illegal going across the border back and forth is 1 too many illegals. We've experienced, for instance, Roxham Road, over 35,000 illegals coming up through the American border on just 1 illegal border crossing. We need to do everything we can to tighten up our borders, to strengthen our borders. And a message to President-elect Trump: there's no closer ally, there's no other country in the world that has stood shoulder to shoulder with our American counterparts, our friends, our family. It's an insult to the 900,000 Americans that are living here in Canada. It's an insult to the 9 million Americans that wake up every single morning to produce products to ship up to Ontario alone. We hear the message loud and clear. The Prime Minister confirmed today that we're going to have a First Minister's meeting tomorrow at 5 p.m. We need to make sure that he has a strong plan to protect and secure our borders and make sure we address the threat from the U.S. But again, we're the closest allies and friends the Americans have. I'm proud to stand in front of our flags of Canada.
Yeah, no, like I agree with this. This seems like a much more common sense approach than what anyone has said, to be honest, at least so far, right? Trudeau is saying that, you know, we're going to deal with it. We're going to deal with it. Pierre is saying Canada first, right? Very different approaches. I get it. And don't get me wrong, I'm very much pro Pierre's decision, but it does feel like an act of betrayal, right? And I've said this when it was first announced, like, wow, I don't blame Trump for trying to, you know, piss on Canada to try and establish his dominance, right? Like he's a dog on a fire hydrant. But at the same time, man, like frig and crying out loud, this affects the American economy too, and Americans. It's a bold move. It's a very bold move, but hey, that's how Trump rolls, right?
In the U.S., I'll always be proud. I'll be proud to call thousands of Americans and millions of Americans our closest allies. And just a reminder to the American people, yes, it will hurt Canada. Yes, it will hurt Ontario, but it will hurt Americans. It will hurt their economy when 9 million Americans don't wake up to produce products for Ontario and Canada. And we want to work together. We are stronger together. At the end of the day, there's no two closer allies, more of an open border than Canada and the U.S. And I want to emphasize, to compare us to Mexico is the most insulting thing I've ever heard from our friends and closest allies, the United States of America. We want to work together, we will work together, and we'll resolve this problem.
Premier, do would you think that Canada should retaliate in kind if President-elect Trump follows through with this threat, if he's not bluffing, and if he goes forward with a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods going into America? Should all American goods be taxed at the same tariff?
Well, hopefully we won't come to that, but if it does, there is no choice. We have to retaliate. We have to retaliate, not against the Americans, the administration that has made a wrong call on this. It's very simple. And you ask any American, and I know thousands of Americans, and endless governors and senators and congressmen and women, if they feel Canada is a threat. The answer is no. Can we do a better job? Do we need to do a better job on our borders? 1,000%. But we know that when it comes to illegal drugs, our police services across the country, federally, provincially, municipally, work with the ATF, the DEA, in making sure that we stop the flow of drugs coming back and forth across the border.
Premier, have you tried to speak to President-elect Trump, or do you desire to try and speak to President-elect Trump directly?
I have not talked to President-elect Trump or anyone in their administration outside of the governors that have come up here and the senators and the congressmen and women that I've talked to numerous times over the last year. We want a close relationship, but we do have to listen to the threat of too many illegals coming across the border. But there's illegal guns, there's illegal drugs, there's illegals coming across our border, and those guns are being used on heinous crimes coming in from the U.S.
Yeah.
So we have to squash the illegal drugs, illegal guns, and the illegals coming across the U.S. into Canada.
Tom Hall and the incoming borders are, as
I mean, that's the thing, right? Is Canada, yes, we're dropping the ball and we're allowing literal terrorists to come into Canada and they're going to America. That's a huge problem. Huge problem. But dude, America, man, come on. They got, like you said, we have little to no legal, law-abiding firearm owners crime that involve guns. None. Like it's less than 0.5%. If it even exists. Maybe once upon a time, there was one accident that happened in the 70s or 80s. It's like, I don't know, I'm just making shit up, right? But at that point, there's no law-abiding gun owners that commit crimes in Canada. Where are they getting the guns? Can you easily get illegal guns from Canada. I mean, we run a pretty tight ship with our guns. A lot of that stuff is coming in from America. That is a huge problem, right? Are we going to slap tariffs on America because of that until they fix it? I don't know. But this is a super bold move by Trump, and I don't know if the Liberals are the right people to be doing these types of negotiations.
Said Canada can't be a backdoor entryway to the U.S. When you look at the 82% rise that the Border Protection Service has seen over the last couple of years to take it to about 198,000 illegals going in, it coincides with our rise in temporary foreign workers, international students. Do you think that system is being abused by people just looking to get into the U.S.?
Well, I think there's abuse on both sides. I agree 100%. We have to tighten up our borders on both sides. We have illegals coming in from America into Canada as well. We have to work together. You don't go after each other when we have a serious problem. It's like a family member, and they are a family member. The millions of people that travel down to the U.S., not only to vacation, but to do business. And the millions of Americans that come up to do business day in and day out. We love our American friends, and they love us. And this is no way to treat your closest ally. In saying that, we do have a problem. We need to address that problem. And that's what we're going to be talking to the Prime Minister about, the plan on how to secure our borders as well.
When it comes to the auto sector, though, I mean, Mexico, U.S., and Canada are so integrated.
That's right.
Travel across the border 8 times before it's produced.
That's right.
Worried that Ontario's competitiveness when it comes to cheaper vehicles is at risk here if you cut out Mexico?
Well, they're so intertwined, as you say, Colin. It'd be very hard to stop that supply chain. It's very similar that 60% of their energy in the U.S., the 4 million barrels of oil that we ship down to the U.S. to keep their economy going, the energy that flows into New York State and New England to keep their lights on day in and day out. Our energy grid here in Ontario can send energy down to Florida. And it wasn't too long ago, just a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, when they had a natural disaster in North Carolina. Guess who came to the rescue to support our American friends? We had hydro trucks loaded up going down to North Carolina to get their electricity grid back online. That's what friends do. That's what allies do. They don't turn their back on each other. And we have sent crews down there when they had natural disasters numerous times. We're always there to support our American allies and friends.
Falling into the same divide and conquer tactics.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What would our economy look like with a 25% tariff? What would it
Well, it would not be good. It wouldn't be good for the Americans either. 1 in 5 jobs rely on American trade back and forth between the borders. Our critical minerals that we have, they need our critical minerals. They need our nickel. They need our lithium and all the other critical minerals, cobalt. They're in desperate need of cobalt. They need it for their military. They need it to produce products. And they aren't going to make a deal with China. China has 90% of the nickel cornered around the world, but they don't have Ontario's nickel cornered. And the Americans need our critical minerals like they need our energy. And what better friend to support each other than Canada and the U.S. I hope we can come up with a solution to support both sides of the border, work collaboratively in cooperation with the new administration, and I'm confident we will.
Aren't you falling for the same divide and conquer tactics that President Trump used the last time, like 6 years ago? He wanted to do a bilateral agreement with Mexico until Mexico insisted that Canada be part of it. Isn't it kind of, I don't know, a bit of a dick move to throw Mexico under the bus and say it's insulting to be even compared to them?
Oh, it's not insulting at all. You can't compare Mexico to Canada. You can go anywhere in Mexico. You have 2.1 million illegals crossing the border. It's an open border, and hopefully they'll close that border. The drugs are flowing in 24 times the amount of what's flowing in across the Canadian to the American border. In saying that, as I mentioned earlier, 1 ounce of illegal drugs and 1 illegal coming across the border is one too many. I'm sorry.
It's pretty obvious that President Trump is using the threat of tariffs not as an economic policy, but to get an outcome. He wants the border addressed. Do you believe that the federal government has the willingness to act on that as opposed to just starting a fight with the Americans?
Well, I hope they do, and that's why I've requested a meeting as soon as possible. The Prime Minister confirmed this morning the meeting will take place tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and we look forward to hearing from the federal government and their plan. You cannot ignore the threat that we received last night at 6:35 p.m. It's the biggest threat we've ever seen in as far as we're concerned, in decades, more than decades. I can never remember a threat from a U.S. administration like we received today. It's unfortunate. It's very, very hurtful to Canadians and Americans on both sides, because I know Americans love Canada. They love the people in Canada, and we love our American counterparts, and we need to straighten this out. But
this is all true.
Or the threat. They obviously see a problem, not as large as the problem we see down in Mexico, and that's why I've called on the federal government to do a bilateral trade deal with the U.S. and do a separate bilateral trade deal with Mexico. As I mentioned the other day, Mexico two-way trade with Ontario is $40 billion. We import $36.5 billion, and we import $36.5 billion and export $3.5 billion. That's not fair trade. Anything but fair trade. So we need to tighten up the trade deals with Mexico as well. Compared to the U.S., $500 billion of two-way trade, pretty well split right down the center. In the 17 states that were their number one export destination, as I say, 17 states call Ontario and Canada their number one customer. That will affect those 17 states. It's going to affect the 11 other states that call Canada and Ontario their number two largest trading partner in the world. That will affect Americans and Canadians.
Premier, just to clarify your position
Yes.
here, are you officially saying that Ontario wants to see the end of CUSMA and just bilateral trade deals, or should this be one of the options, either the North American Free Trade Agreement or bilateral trade deals with the U.S. and Mexico?
Well, if they came forward, which isn't going to happen, if they came forward and say, let's just re-sign the exact same deal, let's get the deal done, in my opinion. But if they want to start reviewing the deal and making cuts, well, we need to do a bilateral trade deal with the U.S. and a separate one with Mexico.
This is the last question. Premier, speaking of those states that we do a lot of trade with, you've built a lot of relationships with governors over the years. Are you going to be talking to them as well, asking them to appeal to Trump to back down on this?
We are going to do a full-out campaign. Not only full-out campaign, we've had a really strong commercial put together that we're going to be sending down to the U.S., to all jurisdictions in the U.S., talking about how we are stronger together and weaker when we're apart. Again, those critical minerals go to the U.S. military. Every conflict they've had, we stand shoulder to shoulder, putting our Canadian soldiers' lives at risk, because that's what you do when a family member is in an argument or a fight around the world. You stand beside them, you support them. So this is a shock that came to us last night at 6:30, and we're going to address that shock. But we do have to address the problem on our border as well, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we understand their concerns, address their concerns, and make sure that we have a strong economic tie. Because if all heck breaks loose around the world, which hopefully it never will, who do we turn to and who do they turn to? They turn to Canada for the support, and we turn to them for support. It's a mutually rewarding relationship on both sides of the border.
We don't have
That was the last
Thank
question.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
It's not a good look, and I do not envy any one of these people that are having to deal with these level of negotiations. Like, this is insane. This is going to make life very unaffordable for a lot of people, and it's going to have tremendous, long-lasting impacts if those tariffs actually get implemented. But I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments about what we just saw. Next up, we're going to take a look here at CTV that actually breaks down what is going to happen if those tariffs get put in.
To further this conversation is Eric Miller. He's the president of the Rideau Potomac Strategy Group, cross-border consultancy focusing on trade, supply chains, and government affairs. So you are the perfect guest right now. Thanks for being with us. If you don't mind, can we do a bit of a Tariffs 101, Eric, to start? How will this 25% tax or tariff work?
So essentially what will happen is that when a Canadian good goes to enter the U.S., U.S. Customs will collect a 25% tax at the border that will be payable as a condition of importation. So it's essentially adding 25% to the cost of everything that Canada sells. It's collected at the U.S. border.
And who pays that 25%?
The exporter will pay that 25%. And so what this means is that Canadian goods will get a lot more expensive going to the United States, and those costs may get passed through to consumers, but the level of tariff will certainly mean that costs will be borne in large part by Canadians.
It sounds, though, like there could be pain on both sides of the border. Am I wrong?
We have an integrated economy that has been built up over 3 decades, and many in the United States aren't aware of this and aren't really focused on this. But yes, there will absolutely be pain on both sides of the border. The auto industry, as it's structured, cannot effectively function without free cross-border movement of trade, which has existed in that sector since 1965. The energy sector, 28% of Canada's exports. Were you to see tariffs on exports of Alberta oil and natural gas, for example, that would directly increase the power bills of consumers in the Midwest and the South and California and other parts of the United States. So it's essentially making life more expensive for Americans while hurting Canada and its investment climate.
Has there ever been a potential disruption like this before in Canada-U.S. trading?
No.
No, there hasn't. This would be, I think, and I don't want to overstate it, but I think this would be one of the greatest economic crises of our lifetimes, because Canada is built as an economy of trade. It's always been an export economy. And when you go from a situation of having free and open trade to a situation of significantly more expensive trade, that will have significant knock-on effects. And it will show up significantly in GDP. We've heard the numbers, 2.4%, but you will see very profound impacts in every part of the Canadian economy.
Trump also mentioned that Mexico and China will also be subject to these tariffs. China will have an extra 10% added on top. My question for you, Eric, is around the USMCA. Isn't there some sort of protection against slapping tariffs on within that deal that was reached a couple of years ago?
So within international trade rules, there are always provisions that allow governments to take action based on national security. And Mr. Trump is undoubtedly going to use the 1977 International Economic Emergency Act, which gives him very broad authority to do pretty much anything he feels necessary, including put tariffs on goods from...
So there's a couple of ways to interpret that. There's the way of, well, Trump is abusing the system and he is, making things, putting things into gray areas where it gives him permission to do that. That's one way that the left is going to look at that. The other very realistic way is the fact that Canada has screwed up so bad that we now fall into those parameters where these emergency procedures can be used against Canada. That is not good. The fact that we've been walking that gray line for a very long time is absolutely not good. So it's not like, yeah, it sucks that Trump is doing this. It absolutely sucks that Trump is doing this. But more importantly, it sucks that Canada has let this happen to the point where Trump can do this. Trump isn't the issue for following the rules. He's not the issue. It sucks that this is happening. It's Canada's fault. It's Trudeau's fault. It's the Liberal government's fault for dropping the ball so hard where this can freaking happen. Come on, man. Like the whole victim mentality with the Liberals is they're just going to try and spin this. Oh, Trump's the big bad guy. Dude, no, he's not. He's absolutely not. If Canada wanted to do this on another bordering country that was a tenth of the size of what we are, if we had that, Absolutely we would, because that's what you do to grow your economy.
Other countries coming into the United States. And what you really see is that trade agreements fundamentally are built on norms. And when one country is bound and determined to violate the norms of the agreement, it's very difficult for others to really use legal instruments to force them to take a different direction. What we've seen already in the automotive rules of origin case, which happened a few years ago, is the U.S. lost and basically said, I'm not going to implement the changes I need to make. So there is an erosion of norms, and so I don't think the lawyers will save us this time.
Eric, how do you think Canada should respond? Are we looking at a potential tit-for-tat situation where we impose tariffs on the U.S.?
So number one, Canada needs to try to get an understanding of what are the border measures that Mr. Trump is really would like to see addressed. And there are some issues on the Canadian border in terms of southbound migration, in terms of narcotics. But what is his definition of success? At the same time, you have to see that Canada will respond in kind with tariffs that deliver pain to American consumers. In addition, I think there should be some calls made to allies in Europe and Asia, because it's Canada today and they will be next. And so this is not something that will stop with Canada. But I think we're in a situation where, in many respects, it's every country for themselves, unless we can find some way to effectively reason with the United States on not taking this kind of radical action that will end up only hurting it and will certainly end up hurting Canadians.
And finally, I want to ask you, some observers say this is a whole lot of bluster. Trump is saying this, to open negotiations on USMCA, or as you say, take a closer look at what's happening at the border. Others are saying we really need to take him seriously. Where do you fall on that?
Donald Trump is not a politician who says one thing in a campaign and governs another way. He says what he wants to do, and he tries to do it. Remember, he did declare Canadian steel and aluminum a threat to national security, and he absolutely intends to carry through with this. We should also not delude ourselves into thinking that once the initial pain of the tariffs are felt, that he will somehow see reason. He is a politician at the height of his political powers, and the one guiding force in his political life is a belief in changing American trade policy and implementing tariffs, which he believes is a way to make America great again, but really is a way to make America poorer. And so Canada has to be prepared for the long haul here, and it has to be prepared to use any and all instruments that it has at its disposal to avoid these going into effect to begin with, and to deal with them if they do.
Eric Miller, he is the president of the Rideau Potomac Strategy.
Yeah. The issue, again, is not the fact that Trump is, skirting that line and using these powers. The issue is the fact that Canada has fallen into the category where those powers by America, regardless of whichever politician is the president, can use that against us to increase tariffs. And it's a shit situation all around. I think a lot of people were expecting this to happen, and yet we were still all pretty shocked, because it sucks. It absolutely sucks. Imagine the cost of everything going up an extra 25%, or going up more, regardless of what percentage it is, going up more. Come on, man. At that point, Trudeau's gonna have to axe the tax. We're not gonna be able to afford anything. Oh my goodness. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.